Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the Alcohol and Cancer Control Notice of Special Interest webinar. My name is Jennifer Schaefer, and I will be your WebEx technical support host. Before we dive into today's presentation, I wanted to provide some quick information on the webinar platform. All lines have been muted on entry and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please submit your questions and comments throughout the presentation using the chat or Q&A panel and select Host from the dropdown. A moderator will ask the questions on your behalf at the end of the presentation. If you require technical assistance, please feel free to contact me, the host, via the chat panel, and I'd be happy to assist you. If you need live closed captioning, please click the link that will appear in the chat box. And with that, I'd also like to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted at a later date. And now I'd like to turn it over to Tanya to introduce our speakers.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our webinar presenters this afternoon are Drs. Tanya Argus-Collins and David Berrigan from the National Cancer Institute, and Drs. Gary Murray and E. Jan Castle from the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. So we would like to provide an overview of NOSIs, what that means, the Notice of Special Interest, as well as the background and the purpose of NCI and NIAAA's Alcohol and Cancer Control NOSI. Then we'll discuss NCI and NIAAA's research interests and research priorities. Then next we'll discuss the application and submission information, and we'll have Q&A at the end of all of the presentations. So what is the Notice of Special Interest? These NOSIs are posted in an NIH guide so that institutes and centers can use it to share and update research priorities. NOSIs briefly highlight a specific topic of research or programmatic interest. NOSIs direct applicants to relevant funding opportunities for grants, supplements, or competitive revision submissions. But NOSIs are not generally associated with set-aside funds. Generally, we're thinking that the NOSIs are going to gradually replace the program announcements. And if you want more detail about NOSIs, that can be found at the NIH website that's listed on the slide. So today's NOSI is focused on alcohol and cancer. It was released March 18th, 2020. It's issued by the National Cancer Institute and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And this NOSI highlights research addressing the effects of alcohol on human health across the cancer continuum. And it encourages investigator-initiated R01, R21s, and R03 applications. So just to give a brief background on the association between alcohol and cancer risk, we've known since 2007 that alcohol is classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And in the U.S., alcohol use causes approximately 5.6% of cancer cases and 4% of cancer deaths. And it has been stated that the overall absolute increase in cancer risk for one bottle of wine per week equals that of 5 cigarettes per week in men or 10 cigarettes per week in women. On the right, you see a table that was produced by the World Cancer Research Foundation and the American Institute for Cancer Research 2018 report. And what they did was they convened worldwide experts to review the scientific literature to identify and make recommendations on guidelines and policy as it relates to cancer prevention and control. And as you can see, they identified several cancers that are associated with alcohol consumption. So what are those cancers? They include cancer of the mouth, throat, voice box, esophagus, liver, colon, and rectal cancer, breast cancer as well. And also alcohol may increase the risk of certain cancers of the pancreas and stomach. And some of the research shows that there are protective effects as it relates to cancer and alcohol consumption. So our next slide highlights the relationship between alcohol compared to other modifiable risk factors. And so this slide shows that alcohol use is the third leading or largest contributing risk factor for cancer following cigarette smoking and excess body weight. So as a result, there's a renewed focus on alcohol and cancer risk at NCI and other cancer-focused organizations. For example, NCI researchers sponsored the Viewpoint JAMA that focuses on alcohol and cancer risk. The American Institute for Cancer Research provides recommendations to not smoke and not drink alcohol for cancer prevention. And the American Society of Clinical Oncology has a position statement on alcohol and cancer risk and control. However, unfortunately, there's just a lot of ignorance as it relates to the relationship between alcohol and cancer risk. And one study found that a majority of the population does not consider alcohol to be a risk factor for cancer. And there are many reasons why. This slide highlights it's a conceptual model of the effects of alcohol consumption on chronic disease and cancer. And there may be societal factors that are related to low awareness of the link between cancer and alcohol consumption. For example, our drinking culture, the drinking environment, they also influence cancer consumption, as well as demographic factors. For example, we know that men and women have differing mortality and morbidity related to alcohol-related chronic diseases and conditions. But ultimately, these demographic factors and societal factors influence consumption, incidence, and chronic diseases and conditions and cancer risk, and ultimately mortality. So the purpose of this NOSI is to promote research across the entire cancer control continuum, from mechanistic and epidemiological studies through prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship. Also, this NOSI encourages research addressing light and moderate alcohol consumption because past research has focused on heavy drinkers and alcohol use disorders. So NCI's research priorities and research areas fall into the area of communication and awareness of alcohol as a risk factor for cancer, interactions between alcohol use and other health risk behaviors related to cancer, alcohol consumption and outcomes in cancer patients and survivors, alcohol-related policy and its influence on cancer and the cancer burden, and also we would like for individuals to address light and moderate consumption, alcohol consumption. So this slide gives examples of potential research questions that NCI is interested in, and they fall into the area of communications, effects, disparities, and prevention. For example, we are interested in addressing how communicating uncertainty and complexity in relation to alcohol cancer, and health outcomes at multiple levels. Also, we're interested in understanding and improving patient-provider communication regarding alcohol and cancer in primary care and specialty care. We also are interested in health disparities as it relates to examining disparities in alcohol consumption patterns and the relationship to cancer by race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and other factors, sexual and gender and minority status. As it relates to prevention, we're interested in exploring decision-making processes regarding alcohol consumption by patients and caregivers along the cancer control continuum, and understanding mechanisms that link alcohol consumption, cancer treatment effectiveness, and risk of recurrence or second cancers to identify intervention targets. So those are NCI's areas of research, and I'd like to now turn it over to our colleagues at NIAAA, Drs. Murray and Castle.
Yes, my name is Gary Murray, and I am a program director in the NIAAA. And along with my colleague, E.Jen Castle, we'll present some of the perspectives for NIAAA with respect to alcohol and cancer. As you see from this slide, the overall mission of NIAAA in broad terms is to support and conduct research on the impact of alcohol use on human health and well-being. With respect to cancer, NIAAA supports studies directed toward better understanding of the risks associated with cancer and basic studies to identify plausible mechanisms for the development or exacerbation of cancer. Now, there's been a wealth of epidemiological studies for many, many years that have shown that heavy drinking is an important modifier of risk for a variety of cancers. There's been a little bit of a gap in the knowledge in terms of whether alcohol is an initiator of cancer, but as a comorbidity, it's very, very important. And as you can see from this slide, the risks ratio, which is listed here as RR, can be as high as 3.5 to 6-fold higher in upper airway digestive tract cancers, which is the most common and clearest instance of cancer related to alcohol consumption. Now, let me just see here. The strongest association, as I said, is this upper airway digestive tract, and that epidemiology was basically caused by a mutation in the enzyme ALDH2 that resulted in accumulation of acetaldehyde at a much higher concentration than would normally be present, and there was a very strong correlation with upper airway digestive tract cancers. We have had in the past a number of program announcements that have covered the mechanisms of disparities in chronic liver diseases, mechanisms of alcohol-associated cancers. My division is primarily interested in those mechanisms that are associated with organ and tissue damage and that lead to cancers. Later, you're going to hear from E.Jen Castle, who will talk about the epidemiological studies and behavioral studies that we are also interested in. NIAAA is not a one-trick pony. We cover everything from the initiation of drinking to end-stage liver disease that's caused by chronic long-term alcohol abuse. Some of the studies that we have looked at in our division are basic studies on metabolism of alcohol, acetaldehyde, etc. We've looked at alcohol and colorectal cancer, alcohol hepatocellular carcinoma, alcohol and pancreatic cancer. All of these are associated with excessive consumption of alcohol, and sometimes they're exacerbated by the coincidence of being a smoker and drinking at the same time. So these things are synergistic and can lead to dire consequences. Here are two papers that I just wanted to highlight. These are recent papers that came out of research supported by NIAAA. One is an epigenetic signature of alcohol abuse and hepatitis infection during hepatocarcinogenesis. So this is an important paper because alcohol is known to increase the amount of methylation and epigenetic changes in organs, and this is one way that we are trying to look to see just what is it that is the root for the alcohol induced cancer. Another is the moderate alcohol intake promotes pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma in mice. And these are, again, in a system in which the mouse that is used is one that is already susceptible to cancer, and the alcohol exacerbates that condition. So of interest to NIAAA in my division are cellular molecular mechanisms, especially in the role of alcohol in the development of breast cancer. This is one that's very popular in the press, and we hear about it all the time, that even moderate amounts of alcohol can lead to cancers. In the case of breast cancer, it's a very modest increase, but it's there, and it's a very important thing to follow. To characterize the effects of alcohol on cancer stem cells is another basic science study that we would like to pursue through one of these mechanisms. Here's my contact information. You can see that my email address is quite simple. It's gary.murray@nih.gov, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions at any time. You can dial this number. I usually answer myself, and very happy to entertain new and different ideas. And I'm going to turn this over now to Ejen Castle, who is a member of our Division of Prevention and Epidemiological Studies. Ejen?
Thank you, Gary. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to highlight several NIAAA research interests under this NOSI, specifically for prevention and epidemiological studies. This presentation does not intend to cover all research areas of interest to NIAAA. For epidemiological studies, we encourage applications that are hypothesis-driven and supported by biological mechanisms. We also encourage epidemiological studies which consider Lifecourse drinking patterns when examining the dose-response relationships between alcohol consumption and cancer. Here is an example of Lifecourse drinking patterns. These are hypothetical examples for lifetime abstiners, former drinkers, moderate drinkers, and heavy drinkers. This exhibits different drinking trajectories within the same drinking status measured at the baseline, that is midlife in this example. The one-time measure in midlife ignores drinking patterns before midlife and ignores changes in drinking patterns afterwards. The questions are, do the variation in Lifecourse drinking patterns matter? Are there specific windows of susceptibility to certain cancers? Thirdly, we encourage applications that can disentangle the interplay of alcohol use and other factors. In the past, researchers often investigate one factor at a time. However, it's becoming clear that alcohol use may interact with others to contribute to cancers. Here is an example from the California Breast Cancer Research Program. This visualization reflects the complexity of the connections between risk factors and protective factors across biological, behavioral, and social domains. Lastly, I would like to mention that epidemiology methodological considerations apply to alcohol epidemiological studies as well. We encourage studies to take into account biases, effect modification, and confounding. Also, evaluate the generalizability of the findings. For cancer prevention, the guidelines need to be evidence-based. For interventions, we encourage applicants proposing innovative and integrative approaches. We also encourage applications to expand knowledge about the effects of alcohol-related policies on cancer prevention. NIAAA's Alcohol Policy Information System provides detailed information on a wide variety of alcohol-related policies in the United States. It also provides policy information on the recreational use of cannabis. It can be a rich resource for researchers interested in policy-related studies. I'd like to bring my presentation to a close with the final key point. That is, we look forward to the application that can address research gaps and move the field forward. Thank you for your time and interest. I will now turn over the presentation to David.
Hi, everyone. Can the panelists hear me?
Yes.
Super. Anyway, thanks so much to Jennifer, Tanya, Gary, and Ejen for introducing this NOSI concerning alcohol and cancer control. And I think their brief remarks really highlight the wide range of research topics that we feel need to be addressed in more detail in this topic area. And so I'm just going to reiterate for a few minutes the application process related to this NOSI, and then open up the lines for questions and comments. So for a NOSI, you should submit applications for this initiative using one of the 10 funding opportunity announcements, FOAs, or any reissues of these announcements listed in the NOSI. These opportunities that are linked to the NOSI include the parent R01s, some specific R01 program announcements, some specific R21 program announcements, and the NCI R03. I note that you can submit alcohol and cancer control related applications to other FOAs, but they would not be linked to the NOSI, although we will discover that they're in the relevant portfolio upon submission. I won't go into each of the different FOAs listed in the NOSI in detail, but I want to emphasize, first of all, read these carefully because submission requires that you follow the policies and procedures of each specific program announcement. And I want to highlight that many of the FOAs have slightly different due dates, so it behooves you to pay close attention to that. Selection of a FOA for an application is a good excuse to chat with a program director. So use this to reach out to us as you're thinking about the particular target that's appropriate for your grant application. Here's the second 5 of these 10 FOAs listed, and you can see a wide range of topics are addressed, from cancer communications, mechanisms of alcohol-associated cancer, policy effects, and more generic exploratory and small grants programs. There's a number of important dates to note as you're thinking about this process. The expiration date, September 9th, 2023. The earliest submission date, June 5th, 2020. Importantly, as I mentioned, application due dates differ for different FOAs, with the first dates ranging from June 5th to June 24th. It's sad if you miss the date for your target program announcement. So applicants may submit also to any of the reissuances of the above announcements through the NOSI expiration date. Application requirements. All instructions in the application guide and the FOA used for submission must be followed. So again, read those very carefully. Applicants must include the NOT-CA-20-034 without quotation marks in the agency routing identifier field. That's important for us because it's of great interest to program staff to try to track the extramural community's interests in these topic areas that we are signaling an interest in. And applications non-responsive to terms of this NOSI will not be considered for the NOSI initiative. Again, that's a message that it's worth reaching out to a program director to talk a little about your grant, or use an email, just to get the flavor of IC perspectives on the topic area. Standard review criteria, as described in eligible R01 FOAs and others, will be used. The scored review criteria include significance, innovation, investigators' approach, and environment. Additional review criteria may include study timeline, protections for human subjects, inclusion, vertebrate animals, biohazards. Again, the same as for any other NIH submission. Additional resources are available. This webinar will be posted and the slides available but I want to highlight the availability of some sample NCI grants on our website. Those can be of great interest to peruse, especially if you're a new investigator, to get the flavor of the level of detail and prior results and what have you that can be found in successful grant applications. A couple of common questions before we open it up to questions from the audience. As Tanya mentioned at the beginning of the talk, you can read more about NOSIs to make sense of their place in the landscape of NIH communication at this website. There you can see some answers to some NOSI facts. What is a NOSI? How do we track them? And how they're related to funding opportunities. You can also, if you discover a funding opportunity announcement much more relevant to your work that's not listed in the NOSI, you we are eager to have you pick the appropriate program announcement. And in these cases, you just don't list the NOSI in the box. But of course, we're tracking submissions related to alcohol and cancer, both in and out of the NOSI process. So the contacts, many of you know, there's scientific and research contacts, the program director side, Tanya and myself at NCI, Dr. Murray and Dr. Castle at NIAAA. You can learn more about the peer review process in ERA Commons, and when the time comes, financial and grants management contacts, Carol Perry and Judy Fox at NCI and NIAAA respectively, can help address questions related to budget and management. So now I'd like to start addressing some questions from the audience. Please type your question into the question and answer section on WebEx. The first question we have from the web here. Would the impact of light and moderate alcohol on chemotherapy side effects like neuropathy be of interest? And are animal models appropriate? So I can take a stab at those. First of all, yes, animal models are appropriate. Indeed, they're mentioned specifically in the text of the NOSI in relation to estimates of dose-response relationships. And clearly in this understanding side effects, animal models might well be appropriate. And I do think that studies of the interaction between chemotherapy and alcohol consumption and a variety of side effects would be of great interest, since those are going to influence patient and physician activities in this area. Tanya, Gary, or Ejen, did you want to weigh in on this question?
Well, of course, this is Gary. Of course, one of the issues that does occur with extensive or exceeding alcohol use is the effects on the immune system. And some strategies for cancer therapeutics involve immune modulators of one type or another, and those are of interest to us. I don't think they quite fit in this NOSI, but they're certainly of interest to our division. And I wanted to point that out, that I didn't do a good job of differentiating between today's NOSI that we're discussing, which is really on alcohol and cancer control, versus the major thrust of my own division's work, which is on mechanisms and changes in organ damage that lead to cancer. So those are very different things, and David already pointed out that there were a number of different program announcements, and you can read each one and find the one that's appropriate.
Thank you, Gary. The next question, will applications be reviewed by a special panel or regular study sections? And similarly, are grants reviewed by specifically formed panels or go to regular study sections? So that depends on the specific program announcement or PAR that you select. So a submission to a regular program announcement will be assigned to a standing study section. If it's a PAR, there may be a specifically formed panel with reference to that specific PAR, but that we do not form new panels for the NOSI itself. The third question, if project plans to focus on alcohol intake, including but not restricted to cancer, which institute might it be best to contact and submit to? Gary and Ejen, do you want to kick off responding to that question?
Ejen? It seems like if this is a behavioral question and it has to do with alcohol consumption, it would probably go to NIAAA.
Yeah, I believe so. I think the applicants of interest can contact me, and if I cannot answer a specific question or if it's not in my portfolio, I will refer the person to appropriate persons.
That's actually a very important message that you just buried the lead there, but it's important for everybody to know that when you have a question, if you are not sure, any of us who are on this panel would be very happy to refer you to the right person. So, if you can't identify the right person immediately, contact any one of us and we'll get the right person involved.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and just say NCI is also interested in alcohol and behaviors, if it's a behavior-related question. So I think definitely speaking with, program directors to make sure that you find the right home is important.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that as well. If it feels like the grant is kind of cutting across different interests of both ICs and involving a mix of behavioral topics and different kinds of endpoints, cancer as well as others, it might well behoove you to send an email to to all four of the contacts. So, and then that, instead of looking at us, speaking with us sequentially, you can get your question on the table and we can address it. So I'd encourage that strategy as well, especially if it's, a time-sensitive issue with an upcoming deadline or what have you. Are all the applications for this NOSI using NIH standard R01 deadlines? Good question. As I mentioned earlier, each specific FOA has a unique set of deadlines. So examine the program announcements and PARs carefully to make sure you're aware. Often, so for example, the first ones are all in June, but they range from June 5th to June 24th. Will the review committees include a mix of cancer and alcohol experts? Tanya, Gary, Ejen, do you want to comment on the makeup of some of the study sections you're familiar with?
I would say yes, they will. That the scientific review officers who are in charge of these panels are usually pretty good at trying to find the right mix of expertise. They've certainly gotten much better over the last 10 years in that regard, and we are often surprised that there are several alcohol specialists on a cancer panel just because of the changing awareness of the importance of that.
Yes, I second that.
And as a grantsmanship strategy, the makeup of the standing study sections, the members are available on the web. So it can be interesting to look at the composition of the panels and, think a little bit about the expertise of a current panel. The next question, I'm wondering if you've considered including the program announcement, increasing uptake of evidence-based screening in diverse populations in the NOSI. I think it might be sponsored by NIAAA and NCI. That's an excellent question. There, as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of funding opportunity announcements that could be relevant to this NOSI. We were limited in the total number of specific FOAs that we bring to the NOSI. So, but as I mentioned, it does not at all preclude submitting your grant to that program announcement. And we will certainly be tracking in a variety of ways grants that come in this topic area, both linked to the NOSI and not linked. Is there a preference for leveraging current epidemiological surveys for studying, for example, race-ethnic disparities in the association between alcohol use and cancer, or is new data collection preferred? Tanya, would you like to address that one? And then Ejen, these are kind of population area.
Yeah, so I think we're interested in both. And so for secondary data analysis from, various surveys, it makes sense to leverage that data to address questions. And that could be targeted to as an R03 or possibly a R21, grant. As well as we're interested in collecting data as well. And so you may find that you might want to focus on maybe an R01 application as it relates to data collection, and maybe even the R21. So we're interested in both strategies to address these questions.
For NIAAA, we are interested in both as well. As I mentioned earlier, I think the most important question is your proposed study, whether your proposed study can address research gap and move the field forward. So if the existing data sets have a limitation and cannot really answer or address the research gaps, then you probably need to thinking about the primary data collection might be the better way to go. So it up to investigators and to looking into the data sets and decide which way is the better way to do.
Next question, for studies of alcohol consumption trajectories over the life course, is it appropriate to study pre-lesions as a cancer endpoint? Ejen, do you want to comment on that since with the life course element?
Yes. I think yes. We consider all kinds of possibilities. So yeah, absolutely.
And I imagine that the strength of such proposals might depend a little bit on the strength of the case that the grantee can make that the pre-lesion is, a good endpoint in terms of predicting, leading towards the specific cancer endpoints of interest.
I agree. Thank you for pointing that out.
Will NCI or NIAAA fund the grant applications in responding to the NOSI? Gary?
I think both will fund them. I think that if NIAAA finds that it's in our interest to fund it because it's closely allied with the aims and missions of the Institute, then we'll fund it. NCI, of course, has lots more money, but they have a lot more things that they have to spend it on. So, yeah, I think they'll will both be contributing, and we're very happy to have this collaboration.
Absolutely, and I think specific grants, it will depend on who the primary program director and primary IC is, and they're likely to fund that specific grant. But we certainly hope to have a wide variety of successful proposals distributed between the two ICs. Is there any possibility of putting together? Oh, Tanya, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, of course, funding is contingent on the scoring of the application.
Absolutely. So bring your A game, write your best grants, and convince the study sections that you have a terrific proposal, that rises up to the fundable range. The next question, would a study looking at the outcomes of the co-occurrence of alcohol use during cancer treatment and psychosocial outcomes and cost of care be of interest? Yes, I think that topic fits well in with the kinds of research encouraged explicitly in the NOSI and in the general area. So we're certainly hoping to see some material like that. And I I would commend to you also Klein et al.'s editorial in JAMA, which touches on some relevant issues as well. Is there any possibility of putting together a mechanisms and epidemiology together in one R01 application? This is easier for a PO1 funding approach with multiple projects. Are PO1s being considered? Who would like to address that question?
I don't think we've considered that at present. I think that you know, it is true that they do. The two camps have to meet somewhere. I'm married to one, but that's about my extent of epidemiology. So.
Yeah, I think we didn't, you know, list PO1 application paths with the NOSI, but I'm sure both ICs are open to ideas and proposals, and there's a standard path for reaching out to us and contacting us to explore interest in PO1s. I was also interested in the chemotherapy response question in animal models. How about interactions and mechanisms between obesity and chronic alcohol exposure, given they have some overlapping mechanisms in preclinical models? Gary, I think that's up your alley.
It's right up my alley. And in fact, it's sort of a response that I was going to offer earlier when we were talking about health disparities and alcohol and cancer. And obviously there is some strong genetic predispositions. There have been studies with PNPLA3 as a mutation that is very common in some populations, and as a result, they have a greater prevalence of cancer, and that's both because of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and because of alcohol. So yes, there is some interest in that, and that would fall into any one of our cancer mechanisms or tissue damage PAs.
And I think I can also say that NCI DCCPS has a great interest in obesity as well. So interactions between obesity and alcohol use in the cancer control landscape could well be of interest as well. Do the applications have to be cancer related? I think the answer to that is yes. They do not have to have a cancer incidence or mortality endpoint, but we expect these grants to be placed in the context of alcohol and cancer control, broadly defined. If it's just about alcohol, it likely, and it's, you know, totally independent of cancer, it's you know, potentially a grant of great interest, but not really relevant to this NOSI. Does that make sense?
Yes, and one thing I think I'd like to point out, we talked about this before, is that when people put in investigator-initiated ideas, it doesn't matter whether there's a NOSI or not. There is not set aside money for them. And so you can, in fact, put in your best idea. In fact, I think I had a slide somewhere with a bright idea on it. And you put in your best idea, and we will consider it. It doesn't really get a boost in review or a special review. It will come through no matter what.
Are alcohol treatment and intervention studies among cancer or non-cancer patients appropriate? I would say yes, and I would point to the one of the bullets in the several of the bullets in the NOSI mention interventions and potential research areas that include development or refinement of interventions. So certainly interventions seem like a important component of potential applications. Would there be any interest in an epidemiological research proposal focusing on cancers that are not traditionally linked to alcohol if it addresses a research gap? Tanya and Ejen, do you want to chime in on that one?
Hi, yes. There will be an interest as long as it's, you can make a justification in your application for studying that particular cancer. But if alcohol is associated with increased risk, we're definitely interested.
I agree with Tanya. Just like I mentioned earlier also, the studies addressing the research gap is of interest to us. And just remember that the applications, we encourage applications that are hypothesis-driven and supported by biological mechanisms. So as long as you have a good support from the biological studies and mechanisms, and you are able to convince the reviewers, yes, we are interested in those studies.
Is the RO3 mechanism specific to the cancer prevention RO3 PAR? Yes, in this case, the RO3 path that's linked to the NOSI is the NCI Small Grants Program. However, as we mentioned earlier, you can certainly submit grants about alcohol and cancer to other RO3 mechanisms where appropriate. I don't know whether NIAAA has an RO3 path.
Yes, we do.
Would an intervention targeted at decreasing alcohol intake in cancer populations be of interest? Yes, and I think, as we've said, a strong proposal justifying the need for such an intervention, and a theory-based intervention that is innovative and significant would be a very appropriate kind of proposal to link to this NOSI. I think that's just about all the questions. Two more, and then I'll pause and we might be just about done. If I intend to submit to the parent RO1, will there be a place to indicate that we are addressing this alcohol and cancer NOSI? Yes, as we mentioned during the presentation, there's a place in the SF424 R&R form to enter the NOSI ID to link the grant to it. And we encourage and hope that you will, because it helps with us to understand the level of interest in this topic area amongst the extramural researchers. And then second, to what extent are behavioral interventions a funding priority? I think we've addressed this earlier. NCI certainly funds a wide variety of behavioral interventions for cancer prevention and control, both in the general population, so primary prevention, and in high risk and cancer survivor populations. These grants are an important part of our portfolio, and we do note that successful grants must be scored well by the study sections, as I think all of you know now. And so, yeah, we're keen to see this kind of work, and I'll let Gary comment on NIAAA or EGen. I'm not sure which of you, one or both, on the behavioral intervention issue.
I think EGen should comment on that one.
Yeah, I think I agree with David on this. I just second your answers. So we do fund a wide variety of behavioral interventions studies. So as long as the score well and fit into our research interest, then we will consider it.
Yeah, one more question. Are there limits with partnering with CDC-funded cancer control programs for this NOSI? That is, since they are funded by CDC, are there limits with how NIH can fund projects that partner with these programs? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Tanya, others, do you have a perspective there?
I have none.
I'm not, let's see. I'm not sure. I think that we're always encouraging partnering with other organizations, and but I'm not really sure as it relates to the programs that are funded by CDC. So I think that's a question that they would have to contact us. We would have to talk with you individually to get a better perspective.
Yeah, I think I was going to suggest the same.
Yeah.
That they, by a direct email, and we can research it a little better.
Yeah, we'll need to know a little bit more. I totally agree. But in principle, we definitely like grants that leverage partnerships to, identify better data or a unique intervention to evaluate or what have you. But the devil will be in the details. So please reach out to us. Okay, with that, we're at 1:52, and I want to thank all the panelists, Dr. Murray, Dr. Argus-Collins, Dr. Castle, and Jennifer. Thank you for organizing and hosting this, and we look forward to a bunch of really nifty and interesting proposals in this important target for modifiable risk factors related to cancer.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David.
Thank you, everyone.
Jerry. Thank you, Eden and Tanya. With that, as a reminder, we will have the recording posted online at a later date with the presentation. So please check back on the website for additional details. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.